Hello, everyone. This is the first video lecture on the chapter of Adolescence in Development. Okay, so for our purposes, we are going to define adolescence as the period between about age 12 and about age 20. So that might include a lot of you out there. If you are not technically an adolescent, at least culturally speaking, then you might be a parent of an adolescent. It is worth pointing out that adolescence is considered a social construct. And what we mean by that is it is not a concept that all cultures acknowledge. Some cultures don't have a term for this period between being a child and being adult. Rather, in some cultures, you are either a child or an adult. There's not this middle ground. And some argue that that is the reason that adolescence is quote unquote difficult in our culture, because you're neither a child nor an adolescent, right? Or excuse me, you're not a child nor an adult. That for a lot of people between the ages of 12 and 20, they're doing very adult things, right? They might be taking care of children. They might be taking care of their parents. But for others, the period between 12 and 20 is a period of exploration and lack of minimal responsibilities other than themselves. So it's, and I've heard it described as, so your textbook describes it as this time of opportunities and risk. And what that means is that this is a period where you may not have any responsibilities associated with, say, forming a family. So you may not have childcare responsibilities or responsibilities to a spouse, or responsibilities, associated with like making the mortgage payment, right? But you're also old enough that you can make a lot of decisions yourself. You have access to money. You have access to, you have the privilege of driving, right? So you have the privilege of voting, you have the privilege of joining the military, all of these privileges, all of these opportunities. But because, as we'll talk about in a little bit, but because that frontal lobe, the part of your brain that is the one that sort of sorts out good and bad decision making, it's also potentially a risky time. So you might be making decisions during this period that you can't ever undo, right? You might like for instance, a child. Once you've had a child, you can never unhave a child, right? You can give that child up, but you can never not have a child, not have had a child, right? Those are pretty permanent things. And they may be decisions that are being made during this period of time. So it's a really ambiguous period of time. Another way that, like, if we were in the same room together, I might ask you, like, tell me about your experience when you were in the 7th grade. Would you go back to middle school? And some students will say, oh yeah, it was great. Other students will be like, nope, no way in hell they would go back. And one of the things that predicts how if you would want to relive your adolescence is your relative social status and your relative social rank. For instance, students that are people that have high, like they were popular in middle school, they would be happy to go back to middle school, or let's say high school. Students that were not so popular or didn't have privileges, they don't want to repeat that particular time period. So like if you were a star athlete, you probably would repeat high school. If you had minimal privileges and your parents were very strict and you didn't get to go out with your friends, you probably would not want to repeat high school. I think about that a lot now. All right, when people talk about high school reunions and the folks that are like, oh yeah, they do it again, versus the folks that were like, no, don't think I need to relive that period. Okay, so the beginning of adolescence this is one of those examples about where the social labels are tied to biological changes, right? And so textbook wise, we define the beginning of adolescence as the onset of puberty. And puberty is defined as the beginnings of sexual development, right? Boys, you may remember, I don't know if we've discussed this in another chapter, but boys sexually mature slightly later than girls. Girls sexually mature early, about 2 years earlier. So thinking back to middle school, you may have noticed there's this period. I think there's a picture in your textbook. There's this period where girls are significantly more physically grown up. They can be like 2 feet taller than boys. That's probably an exaggeration, but they can be significantly more physically mature, right, than boys. So we have this, there's this trend, it's called secular down here on your slide. There's this period, this trend, it's called secular trend. And that refers to the changing in the timing of the onset of puberty. So gradually, this is especially true for girls, gradually we are sexually maturing earlier than previous generation. There's some theories that suggest why that may be. One theory, and I don't know what the data say, but one theory suggests that it might be tied to growth hormones in the food we eat when we're eating meat and beef and dairy products that have come from animals that are pumped with growth hormones that promote them to grow faster, that's leaching out in our food. And so the growth hormones in our food in the beef production is seeping into our food, and we are eating that, and that's causing us to sexually mature earlier. There's another pattern that has been observed, that when girls are in close proximity to when younger girls are in close proximity to older girls, they will sexually mature faster. So when you put 6th graders with 9th graders in the same building, it will cause the 6th graders to sexually mature faster, to get their period sooner. Girls that have older sisters sexually mature faster than girls that don't have older sisters. So there's some different theories, but the trend is obvious. The trend is pretty clear. Some other important terms from this slide is the difference between a primary and a secondary sexual characteristic. So your primary characteristics are defined by those that cannot be seen. So those are the internal structures related to reproduction: testes, ovaries, uterus, right, mammary glands. The secondary sexual characteristics are the external ones. Those are the ones that you see, and those are all, according to evolutionary psychologists, the secondary sexual characteristics are supposed to be outward signs of sexual maturity. So when your ovaries kick in, when your testes kick in, right, and start producing lots of testosterone or lots of estrogen, this causes the external body to sexualize or to feminize or masculinize, depending, right? So for girls, that means that the development of her breasts, that means her voice gets higher, these kinds of things. For boys, it means his voice gets lower, his Adam's apple gets larger, because the same hormones that cause the ovaries and the testes to develop, to do what they're supposed to do, also sexualizes or feminizes the outward body. So it makes the girl's body curvier, it makes the men, more masculine, facial hair grow. So I like to say that testosterone, which is the hormone that causes the genitalia to masculinize, also causes the Adam's apple to get thicker and the vocal cords to get thicker, which causes a deeper voice. So all those things are tied up together. Primary and secondary characteristics, right? A couple other things that are important over here are these two terms. I meant to Google pronounce them before I recorded and I forgot, but this term right here, which refers to the first, if you will, nighttime emission, or back in the olden days we call that a wet dream, but it's when a man involuntarily ejaculates during the night. Yeah, that's what that word means. And then over here you have the term menses, which refers to a girl's first period, right? And that happens during this puberty. Yeah, trend used to be sixth, seventh grade in there. So yeah, and then effects of early versus late maturation. So the way a person responds to, or the way a person is received, an adolescent is received by their peers, if they sexually mature earlier versus if they sexually mature later, right? So some of the things that are significant here are girls who sexually mature sooner will develop, they are more likely to be shorter and stockier and thicker. Girls that sexually mature later are more likely to be longer and leaner. Girls that mature sooner are more likely to attract the attention of older boys. This may have implications for their relative popularities. They may be more popular because they have the attention of the boys. It also means they're more likely to be sexually active at a younger age. Boys who sexually mature later may suffer socially with their other peer group. Not only are boys later relative to girls, but now they're developing later relative to their male peer group. And when physical prowess and athletic ability are very popular or are very important for a community, a boy who develops later may suffer socially. So, like I was saying in the beginning, this is this period of life is significant. The social and the biological, how biology changes has social implications. Going way back to chapter 1, when I asked you to make the connection between how someone's physical development may influence their social and their emotional, adolescence is a really good example of how the way our body changes, that may have implications for how we are socially accepted or not socially accepted by others. I think this is a great place for me to stop right here.